Hi there. Don't change the channel, this is not a reception problem. The purpose of this video is to review the differences between the different Electribe models with a particular emphasis on oscillators and filters. But before we get to that, let's start with an overview of the different Electribe models. From a chronological perspective, the first Electribe, the gray one, came out in 2014. Then the Electribe Sampler, the black one, came out in 2015. And then around mid-2016, the blue and red models came out. So now we have 4 models of Electribes. 2 Synth Electribes, or regular Electribes, the gray and blue one, and 2 Electribe Samplers, the black and red one. The main difference between the new Electribes and the old ones, beside the obvious color differences, is that the pads on the new ones are slightly better and more elevated. All 4 share very similar characteristics. They're great groove boxes. They're synthesizers with oscillators, filters, LFO, and envelopes. Each supports 16 tracks. They have 24-note polyphony. They have a Chaos XY pad for effects control and note playback. They've got 38 insert effects per track, 32 master send effects, which you can turn on and off for each track. They can sequence external gear and receive sequence information or MIDI data from external keyboards. They have over 400 different sounds each. You can store 250 patterns with up to 4 bars each. You get great factory presets along with each of them. They both support export to Ableton and many, many more features. So what are the differences between the Electribe and the Electribe Sampler? The most obvious difference is that you can add new samples to the Electribe Sampler. You get up to 273 seconds of mono sampling, or half that if you want to sample stereo. You can sample from multiple sources. There's an audio in jack. You can resample the audio coming out of the Electribe, or you can load mono and stereo wave files from an SD card. The sampler supports sample slicing with transient detection, so you can load up a bar or two from a song you like, chop it up either by beat or by transient, and take it from there. If you want to create samples that have a looping section for long sustain, you can do that. Once you record a sample, you can play melodies with it, even though the sound isn't warped. So the higher pitch you play, the shorter the sample will get, and the lower the pitch, the longer the sample will get. And you can trim, crop, and play samples in reverse. I'll be creating a more detailed video about the sampler later, so hit subscribe and click the little bell button if you want to be notified when that comes out. The gray and blue Electribes also come with factory installed samples and PCM instruments. You can use the edit button to adjust the brightness or distortion of a sample, but unfortunately you can't load new samples onto the machine. You also can't use the edit knob to reverse existing samples on the system. When it comes to synth capabilities, that's where the gray and blue Electribes have more to offer. The sampler only has one type of a filter for each of the low-pass, high-pass, and bandpass filters. The sampler has 16 synth oscillators, and it can accept both mono and stereo audio input and apply effects to those. On the other hand, the gray and blue Electribes have plenty of filters. They've got 6 low-pass, 5 high-pass, and 5 bandpass filters. They've got 54 different synth oscillators, and they can apply effects to incoming audio, but they'll change it to mono. So the bottom line is, if you need to make a decision between the Electribe and the Electribe Sampler, these extra filters and oscillators need to mean a lot to you for you to give up the sampler. And that's the purpose of the rest of this video, to explore what those filters and oscillators are. I'll start by showing the oscillators and filters that are common to all 4 machines on the Electribe Sampler. A little bit about what we're seeing here visually. On the left you have an oscilloscope, and on the right a spectrum analyzer. And of course these are overlaid in the video. Neither of the 4 models have an oscilloscope or a spectrum analyzer. You'll notice the edit knob changes the parameters of the oscillator, for example the pulse width for a square wave. As we cycle through them, you'll notice the oscillators have a waveform, and that determines the tone and the harmonics of the sound. Except for the sine wave, which unmodified doesn't have any harmonics. You can see the harmonics coming in and then going out when we go back to a pure sine wave, and we'll use that later on to test the filters. Beyond the 4 basic saw, triangle, square, and sine waves, the Electribe Sampler has 4 unison versions of them and 4 sync versions of each. So that's 12 oscillators altogether, regular, unison, and sync. I'll just cycle through the sine sync waveform here. And besides those 12, the sampler has 4 noise oscillators. And because those noise oscillators create a sound across the spectrum, we're going to use that to test the filters. So filters let you do two things. On one hand, they cut out sound. They filter out parts of the spectrum. And here we have a low-pass filter, cutting out the higher portions of the spectrum. This is an example of a high-pass filter, filtering the lower parts of the spectrum, the lower sounds. And a bandpass filter, cutting out both highs and lows across different parts of the spectrum. So that's one thing that filters do. They cut out parts of the spectrum. The second thing filters can do is actually add sound on the cutoff point, and that's called resonance. So you can see as we go down the spectrum here, resonance is adding sound to the cutoff point. If you turn the resonance way up, you can see it can even start creating its own harmonics. This is how the filter affects a sine wave. You can see it doesn't do much until it hits the actual frequency of the sine wave, then starts attenuating it, and if I kick up the resonance, it'll create harmonics as it passes the sine wave, and then go back down. When an oscillator has harmonics, things get a lot more interesting. The filter starts impacting the sound immediately as you start lowering the cutoff point. If we bring up the resonance, we can actually go ahead and play every single one of the harmonics as we go up with the frequency of the cutoff point. As we increase the complexity of the wave, for example here with unison song, you can see the sounds get a lot more interesting. Let's leave the sampler and move on to the gray Electribe. I'll start with the filters without any resonance. See if you can tell the difference between the Electribe filter and all the others. Looking at this a little bit more closer, it seems like the Electribe filter has a slope of about 12 dB per octave. The MS-20 has a very similar slope. Moog is coming in at about 20, probably 24 dB per octave. The Prophet 5 slope seems very similar to the Moog. The Oberheim slope goes back to a leisurely decline, and then Acid is sharper again. Okay, let's bring in some resonance. I'm going to start by showing you the resonance and harmonics of the resonance on white noise, so you can see how it affects across the spectrum. And then we'll do the same on a sine wave. Let's see how resonance impacts a sine wave, which, as you remember, doesn't have any harmonics. We'll start with the Electribe filter and move on from there. Notice the amplitude LFO on the P5 low-pass filter. Okay, so hopefully you've had enough of filters. Let's move on to the oscillators. The gray and blue Electribes have all the same oscillators as the sampler and almost 40 more. I'll show you just a few of the extra ones. I'll be doing a more in-depth tutorial of the synth and how to work it. So hit subscribe and click the bell button if you want to be notified. The noise oscillators are the same as those on the sampler. As an extra bonus for making it this far, I'll give you a taste of the PCM samples on the gray Electribe. You can see how the Electribe plays back samples with a loop point. There are also some other nice models of other instruments. You'll see that in the oscillators that aren't waveforms, the edit knob has sometimes no impact at all. Sometimes it impacts distortion or brightness, as I mentioned before. Anyway, thanks for watching. Hit subscribe and like if you want to see more. See you later.